all good. Good morning, or good night, or good afternoon, whatever it is right now. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another episode of BIM After Dark Live. This is episode 71, and I've got an awesome guest, and we are talking about Rhino Inside Revit. So, for those of you that have never heard of Rhino, this will be awesome because you'll learn what it is. For those of you maybe who've used Rhino but not used Revit, this will be a cool way for you to see the connection. And maybe some of you who've used Revit but haven't used Rhino, or maybe you got Rhino models and you're like, what do I do with this? I think this will be a great conversation. So I'm super excited. And welcome back to you guys tuning in live. I appreciate you being here. It's been, I think, 2 months since the last live episode. So it feels good to be back. And I'm excited. I'm excited for everyone to be here. Before we jump into the content and I introduce my guests, I want to remind everyone that we are live if you're here at 9 p.m. on a Thursday night. So feel free to chat away, and I will keep an eye on the chat box and bring in some questions that you may have on the fly. So don't be shy to ask those questions. But before we jump into it, I did want to mention our new sponsor for this season. So these next 10 episodes of BIM After Dark Live, we've got some awesome guests lined up. But I did want to introduce our new sponsor and sort of introduce you guys to another proud partner of this show. So with that, I'm going to roll a clip and we'll talk about it in a second. Don't get it by now, what you just saw there. Twinmotion. Twinmotion is the sponsor of these next 10 episodes of BIM After Dark Live. For those of you that don't know what Twinmotion is a real-time rendering engine built on the Unreal platform. I've talked about it quite a bit here on the channel, so make sure you check out my videos on it. But essentially, real-time rendering program, but with lots of flexibility. If you watch any of my videos on it, you'll see it's got some incredible features. The new Twinmotion, which I just did a review on, 2022, has some awesome new features such as Path Tracer, which adds a ton of realism. Thousands and thousands of assets. I talked about it in the video. The Quixel assets, which are scanned assets, are incredibly awesome looking. The detail, the flexibility, and so on, as well as cloud rendering and cloud presentation techniques. So feel free to check out my videos. I'll put links below, but definitely head on over to twinmotion.com/BIMAfterDark to start your free trial right now and see what it's all about. I promise you will not be disappointed. All right, and thank you, Twinmotion, for supporting this episode and future episodes. And I hope you guys go over there and start a free trial just to show them that you love the show and you're happy that they're supporting it. So awesome. And it looks like we got some returning visitors to the chat room here. Welcome, guys. We got some Rochester, New York. Harold from Rochester. Got some LA. Cool. We got some spread out across the globe here. So one last thing before I introduce my guest is don't forget to subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. If you haven't noticed, we're at like 53 or 54,000 subscribers. The goal is to try and hit 100,000 by the end of this year. So I need you guys to subscribe. I also have been publishing a ton of videos beyond the live stream. There's something like over 22 videos in the last month alone, tutorials and tips. And then obviously the live stream, you'll get notified right away if you subscribe and hit the notification bell. So with all that said and all that out of the way, I think it's finally time to introduce my guest. So without further ado, let me make sure your mic's on. Ehsan, what's up, man?
Hey, man, how are you?
Welcome back to the show. Yeah. Ehsan was on episode 35 of the show. God, that was probably like a year and a half ago, maybe even 2 years ago now. And talking about PyRevit, which is a plugin that he built for Revit, which is phenomenal. And I have a link to that already in the description below, so definitely check out that episode. And I believe you came back on for episode 50 when we did the superstar Ask Me Anything
yeah.
with like 10 other guests, and that was pretty fun too. So thanks for coming back on, man. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So before we jump into the content itself, I guess for anyone who didn't see those episodes and doesn't know who you are, let's give them a quick rundown of who you are and what you do, and why did I reach out to you to jump on this show?
Of course. I guess if anybody has worked with Revit and PyRevit, they might have heard of me as sort of like the guy who created PyRevit initially. These days, we have more supporters now that contribute code to the PyRevit repo, so I can't take the whole credit anymore. I after a couple of years of like working on PyRevit, I got an opportunity to join McNeel and work on Rhino Inside Revit here. So, and sort of like these two are the two major projects that I'm involved in right now and work on.
Awesome. And as far as your background, I believe you come from the architectural background. Is that if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken?
Yeah. I went to school for architecture back in Iran and then moved to the US, worked here, got my license. Up until 2017, I was still like fairly full-time active in the architecture world. Obviously, like working with Revit and still developing PyRevit, that kind of stuff on the side. But the main primary job was being an architect.
Awesome. And that little context there, because I think it does play into at least the discussions I've had with you, sort of your approach to some of these more software applications, but coming from the experience and background of an architect, I think lends yourself to solving problems a little differently. And even as we were talking just before we went live about sort of Rhino Inside and the story behind it, I think your architectural background is probably what helps you be such an asset to the Rhino Inside team, I would say, especially the Rhino Inside Revit team for sure.
Yeah, definitely, that's true.
Awesome. So let's jump right into it, man. Let's first start. I know you sort of have an idea in mind, but I do want to start with sort of, what is Rhino, or if you want to start there, as broad or basic as we can for people who maybe don't know, and then we can kind of talk about this connection with Revit, and also like where within the context of what we all do as AEC professionals, how this kind of helps us and could be a valuable asset to our toolbox.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I can use my screen to show some of this
Sure, let's do it.
stuff, right? So let's go to rhino3d.com. I kind of want to give you an idea of what Rhino actually is. And why is it so slow?
Probably because you're streaming with me. The last thing we want to see is the news of today right now, right?
Exactly. Anyway, so Rhino is basically a surface mathematically accurate surface modeling application, right? So think of designing a car or designing jewelry or designing industrial design, sort of like products, that kind of type of products. One of the best softwares that it could use is Rhino, because it has super accurate NURBS modeling, and that means that you could model everything that you want very accurately and also send it for fabrication, same models, all that kind of stuff, with no issues, no loss of resolution, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So Rhino has been active for 30-something years in the industry, in different industries, jewelry industry, car design, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. A lot of fabricators also use it. For example, if you work with what is it? CLT, the new CLT products that are coming out, that kind of stuff. Like a lot of companies are actually using Rhino for any sort of form of accurate fabrication. Mm-hmm. About like, I don't know, I think it was like 12, 13 years ago or something like that. An add-on was created for Rhino that's called Grasshopper. So in the context of whenever in AEC we talk about Rhino, we generally talk about both of these at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. Rhino plus Grasshopper. Grasshopper is the visual scripting, visual programming environment for Rhino that gives you access to its geometry engine and basically lets you automate whatever you want. And also this sort of like gives you this flexible parametric model that you can play with and sort of like generate geometry. So it got super popular in architecture for designing shells and sort of like buildings and all that kind of stuff. You can imagine all curved surfaces, anything like that. So it's been being used in the past 10, 12, 13 years in the AEC to design very complex, highly mathematical forms. And but so far it's been sort of like its own application and its own plugin and all that kind of stuff. Sort of like when Revit started getting more popular and all that kind of stuff, well, everybody started talking about, okay, so how can I bring my Rhino model into Revit, or how can I grab Revit content and take it to Rhino? Previously, in the old times, we would always talk about file formats as sort of like a way to interoperate between the different applications.
Mm-hmm.
But the new model is, especially by the introduction of Rhino Inside, the new model is that we can sort of like integrate these applications together. So they have access to each other's APIs. They run in the same memory space, and it can work with each other directly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm going to show you tonight, sort of like what Rhino Inside Revit is really in that sense.
No, I love that. That's so we can think about it instead of, and that's again sort of a lot of my experience in the past with Grasshopper or Rhino has been, what file format is it in, and how can I get it to import it into Revit, right? and then once it's there, what do you do with it? And so I like this idea of it doesn't have to be an import, right? It can be something that we can work hand in hand with, and that's pretty awesome. I also didn't really, I never really connected the dots between sort of the fabrication side of it and the accuracy of the NURBS curve, and so you're free forming like a blender, for example, but you're doing it at a very, very high accuracy for this. And then I never really connected the dots that Grasshopper was kind of the tool that could that sort of push the AEC industry into looking at it, because then you can take something that fabricating one little piece of something, right, and modeling one little piece makes sense in pretty much any 3D modeling program, but then you multiply that across a 70-story building, right? That's where the mathematic and Grasshopper helps, because now you can componentize things, you can parametrics. That's awesome. That's great. So
exactly,
awesome.
And then we architects always say design is an iterative process, right?
Right.
Grasshopper made this interface very, very easy to access. So you could sort of like build the logic of this geometry that you want to, and just play with the sliders and the values, and play with the shape of your model. So you can iterate your design options a lot faster that way.
Awesome. All right, so let's jump in. Let's now we kind of set the context a little bit. I know you had some ideas of how you wanted to flow through it, and so I'll keep an eye on the chat, so you guys feel free to ask questions the entire time. I'm sure I will jump in and ask questions as well. But but go ahead, man. Let's see.
Okay. So at first, I want to kind of give you an introduction of what Rhino Inside Revit is. We kind of know at this point that Rhino is a 3D modeler. You might have seen screenshots of the application, Grasshopper, all that kind of stuff. But I'll show all of them here to you as well. The way that you can get Rhino Inside Revit is that you can go to rhino3d.com inside Revit, and then it automatically points you to version 1, which is the active version of the product. You have the download buttons for Rhino Inside Revit and Rhino 7, the latest version of Rhino 7. The Rhino Inside Revit is free. The only thing you need is a license for Rhino to be able to run the application on your machine and sort of connected to Revit. So once you install Rhino Inside Revit, it gives you this. It's basically a plugin for Revit, right? Just like any other plugin for Revit. It gives you this tab that's called Rhino Inside, and you get 2 really important panels for Rhinoceros and Grasshopper, right? These 2 different applications. Well, one is the main application, the other one is the plugin that we talked about. The incredibly important point here to understand is that when this plugin is installed, and when I click on this start button here in the corner, it actually launches the installed version of Rhino that you have on your machine separately inside of the memory space of Revit, right? So when I click on Rhino, I've already clicked to start, and it's already loaded. The buttons are active. When you first load the Revit and Rhino is not loaded, these buttons are disabled. So when I click on this, you can see the Rhino interface. Now, this is almost identical to when you're running these 2 applications separately from each other, right? Each one of them has its own window. They are 2 different separate applications. But if I go to the taskbar at the bottom, see these 2 windows belong to the same application. They're running in the same memory space, right? This means that whatever Rhino creates, Revit can read, and whatever Revit creates, Rhino can read. And the way they communicate with each other is through their APIs. Revit API has a database API that it can access. It has UI API that it can change the Revit UI and add buttons and stuff. And Rhino has Rhino Common, which is basically its API and its geometry engine, which is incredibly powerful and fast. So this is basically the Rhino interface. Just very standard 3D modeler, different perspective views. You can do, navigate, all that kind of stuff, different, modeling. And you have like tools for surfaces, all that kind of stuff. It looks very much like any other CAD product, kind of, right? I'm going to close this window, but note that every time I'm closing any of these windows, I'm not actually releasing Rhino memory. Rhino is still in memory. The only thing that I'm doing is basically hiding the window so it's not in my way, right? The moment I click on this, Rhino comes back up again. And then the second thing is Grasshopper. Grasshopper is the plugin, is the visual programming plugin for Rhino that we talked about. We have created sort of like a independent tab for it, a dedicated tab for it, so you can control its features and all that kind of stuff. Because when I personally talk about Rhino inside Revit, one of the most important aspects of it is access to Grasshopper, right? Everything else that's in the backend that Grasshopper uses is also important, like the geometry engine to do geometry booleans and conversions and all that kind of stuff. But this is one of the main ways that we actually use Rhino inside Revit. To give you an example, let's say I do have a Rhino, an empty Rhino model in here, right? And I'm going to grab this viewport and bring it out because I don't want to see the rest of the Rhino interface. And I'm going to put it here, right? And then I'm going to draw a couple of walls in here in my Revit. And notice that just that window is just sitting there, right? Because it's pretty much the same application. Let me hide these floating menu. It keeps coming back up. Anyway, let me go to a 3D view, and I have these walls. Now, let's say in the old times, you had to export this, import it in Rhino, and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to go to Grasshopper, and we have the Grasshopper has sort of like its first parameter tabs that are basically all the data types that it supports, right? Meshes, VREPs, boxes, circles, points, all that kind of stuff. We have a series of Revit primitives now when Grasshopper launches inside Revit. So like wall is one of them. I can right click on this and I'm going to go turn on the icon so they kind of like, you can correlate between the two. And I'm going to say select multiple walls. I'm going to select, and notice this is Grasshopper selecting Revit elements, right? I can say finish and look here. I already have the geometry in Rhino. So if I want to, for example, if I have some Revit geometry in Revit and I do have the shell of the building designed in Rhino, I can really superimpose these two very quickly and kind of like see what's going on there, right? I can also interrogate all these different wall instances that are inside Revit. Let's say I want to read a parameter from it. Let's say if I click on the wall, I'm going to close this window because we don't want to see that anymore. Let's say I want to read the unconnected height, right? We have a dedicated Revit tab in Grasshopper that has lots and lots of components for different aspects of dealing with Revit native geometry, right? One of them sort of like is element, which holds information about any Revit element, right? So I can come here and say element parameter, and I'm going to pass all the elements to it. And this would be unconnected height, the name of the parameter. And then I can see all the values for these parameters right here. And if I go here and change the height of this wall, I can see that that value is updated, right? So this is basically what Grasshopper is. I have components to access the data, which are the parameters, and I do have components that work on those data. We generally tag them, color-coded them with query, modify, and sort of like analyze. So anything that's green queries stuff from a Revit model. Anything that's a sort of like a magenta color analyzes information, and all the blue ones, assigned ones that you're seeing, actually add stuff to the Revit model. So now this was sort of like the approach from going from one side to the other, which is Revit to Rhino. Now imagine I'm going to just hide this for a second. I'm going to go to Rhino. And I'm going to draw let's say just draw a basic line, right? From here to here. And then I'm going to go back to Grasshopper, add a parameter for a line somewhere else on my canvas. And I'm going to select one line, but see, now I can select that from Rhino. Let's just draw the line from here. And I'm going to go back to Revit. Now I have a Rhino curve, right? I just created a curve in Rhino. That's part of the Rhino API, Rhino geometry. I'm going to go to here, wall, say add wall by curve, and then pass a curve to it. And I do have that model, Revit wall right here. And this, for all intents and purposes, this is a native Revit wall. If I unpin this, Grasshopper automatically, we have designed in a way that it automatically pins all the geometry that it creates, so you can drive it. And I'll show you how basically that works. But basically, if I unpin it, I can edit the type. I can edit the profile of the wall. It's just like any other Revit wall, right? I'm going to keep that pinned. The beauty of working with Grasshopper is that if I go back to, let's say, open a viewport in here, and let's say pick a different line. Notice that the wall completely changed in Revit. So this gives you this sort of like amazing parametric interface to automate either side. Either Revit. Grasshopper has 13 years of experience in automating Rhino. It's fairly newer in Revit, but we have created a lot of components for it. And you can see that we have components for assemblies, component for like beams and ceilings and floors and roofs and that kind of stuff. Various different Revit categories, working directly with direct shapes in Revit, working with Revit models, which is like the documents, projects, whether they're families or project models. Specifically working with families, you can create automatically create families using Grasshopper this way, filtering all sorts of content from your Revit model to be able to extract information, working with materials, which is really important. You can add materials, add textures, all that kind of stuff that you want to do, different assets that they're called in Revit material API. And then grids, levels, working with parameters, site, design options, types, views, walls, all sorts of stuff that we have added to Rhino Inside Revit, and we keep adding more and more stuff.
So there's a question that I think I can build on a little, because I had a question too. But Boris asked, when a parameter is modified in Revit, does it automatically update in Rhino? I think to build on that, you showed the native Revit wall being driven by geometry in Rhino, through Grasshopper. That the walls that exist in Rhino that were drawn in Revit, are those native Rhino geometry?
The walls that are drawn in Rhino.
Yeah, when we selected the walls and you pulled them into
Yeah.
Rhino.
Are
those native Rhino geometry that now have Revit parameters, or you have to push all of that if you wanted to?
You get to push whatever you want to. So when you're going from Revit to Rhino, you're basically going to from an application that has a very strict hierarchy to an application that's sort of like works based on layers, and it can attach any sort of data.
Yep.
So using Grasshopper, you can pick and choose whatever data that you want to push to Rhino that way.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's why I was curious. I was curious how it handles that, faceted, geometry-based side of it versus the component-based side of Revit, like you said, very strict. And so it's basically whatever you push through, or however you want to push it through, is how it's gonna go.
Rhino for every piece of geometry. Rhino has support for what we call sort of like user parameters, right? So you can give it any parameter with any value. It doesn't really care what's going on. It doesn't really know what it is. Revit is the one that actually knows, I don't know, what height of the wall is or what it meant to be. But if you want to push the information up to Rhino, you could do that very sort of like in a customized way in Grasshopper.
Okay.
I just opened another model. This is an empty Revit model. And then I'm going to go back to Rhino Inside to Rhino, and I'm going to open a Rhino model here now. And this is sort of like an example of a couple of buildings. It's a 3DM file that I opened. I'm gonna let that open for a second. So that's sort of like the model that we have, a couple of different buildings sketched out, a little bit of a structure in here, all that kind of stuff. I'm gonna move the preview out so we can see this. I'm gonna maximize this again, go to Grasshopper, and I'm going to open a definition that we specifically created for this to bring those geometry from Rhino to Revit, right? So see, the moment I open Grasshopper and those components are in, what I'm seeing is that a preview of the geometry, and this is not in my Revit model yet. All this red stuff are just previews of the geometry that I've selected in Rhino. And I can come here and say I've sort of like designed the first part of this definition to collect the floors, basically the profiles in here that are sitting on in the model, and create actual Revit floors in here. So I'm going to enable this component now. And it's going to generate, actually, hold on. One thing that I forgot is I have to graph this. Yes. So you can see that it actually created, like these windows. Obviously, with this larger screen, window management becomes a little bit of an issue. I can select any of these floors, and this is actual Revit floor with a specific type that I selected in Grasshopper. I can edit its boundary. You can see like it shows me dimensions, all that kind of stuff. It is a native Revit model. So I can use this to generate all this stuff and then sync my model, and everybody else would be able to continue working with this because none of this is really Rhino geometry. It's all Revit. And then here, I'm going to go grab a couple of the columns. So they show up right here. And I'm basically grabbing the points down at the bottom here, finding the sort of like the projected point on the canopy right there, and constructing a set of columns. And you can see very quickly that this geometry was created in Revit, and I can see the preview of it back in Rhino. You're going back and forth between these two applications without really noticing. And then if I go here and let's say that the top surface, the roof surface came from Rhino. If I move this, Revit model also moves. So it goes back to Revit, calculates the length of the columns, creates them, and the geometry is back in Rhino very quickly. And then wall that we have created here, in this part of the graph, I'm actually reading the points for that and placing adaptive components that are native Revit families in here. And then I can say, like, I have two different types that I've picked for these panels. I can switch to something else. And I have a random thing that sort of like places those randomly. And we can even like switch the pattern to see what's going on very quickly. So imagine you have designed an exterior shell in Rhino, and you are very quickly capable of bringing all of that in native geometry in your Revit. Nobody has to go remodel all that kind of stuff anymore, right? So that was one of the examples that I wanted to show, and I have one more.
No, that was cool. That was before you jump into the example. I did want to. Shamila has a question. Are the models saved simultaneously in Revit and in 3DM? So I think that's probably along the lines of if you're opening the Rhino model and you're showing this connection you're making, I assume it's still handling two native files for each program, right? Is that's
yeah. So whatever you see in Rhino, you can hit save and save it as a 3DM, and whatever you have in Revit, you can hit sync and synchronize with your
Yeah, no, and so my follow up to that is then so what you're saving though is the natively created geometry in either one, right? The red,
exactly.
The temporary red we were seeing is actually that's well, I guess I shouldn't say that because in Rhino that was the model, but in Revit, for example, you would only be saving the floor and the curtain wall that you developed from it, unless you ran the script again and then you see the geometry and all that stuff, right?
So Grasshopper previews the geometry first using those red colors, right? In Rhino or in Revit. In Revit, you use the native create components, these sign ones, to actually generate the geometry. And in Rhino, we have this concept of baking. So whatever you have red previews that you see, when you're happy with them, you just click on the component and say bake, and it would bake it to the Rhino model in whatever layer you want to place it on and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what that's what I had to connect in my brain, which thank you for running through this because it does. Because in Rhino it makes sense, which is a face-based, mesh curve, NURB, whatever you want to call it, right? Where pretty much anything that exists as a 3D plane you can create into an object on a layer, like you said, and save. That doesn't happen in Revit, right? With work planes and the restrictions on it. That's why you'd have to the idea of creating native geometry from this other geometry is the only way to necessarily get it to. Otherwise, you'd be going back to the old school, like you just said. What format comes in that's usable, right? and then how can we use it, right? And that's what it always was with Rhino. It's or not even Rhino, but just in general, lots of SAT, like you name the file type, right? It's always been how do we take this face-based 3D mass type of file and actually use geometry in Revit and make it a building, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So like one of the questions that has always been asked, hey, like I have this file format, how can I bring it into Revit, right? So imagine like right now with Rhino Inside Revit, I'm going to minimize this a little. With Rhino Inside Revit, I can open Rhino, and Rhino reads and writes something around like 40 something file formats, right? So I can read step files, all the other stuff into the Rhino model, and then use Grasshopper to selectively convert and create whatever that I need in my Revit model based on a definition, right? So sometimes you have a geometry on Rhino side because it's sort of like a little bit sort of like a looser application, right? It's not BIM. And you may want to extract, like if I have a wall, I may want to extract the baseline, the base curve, and then use that to actually create a proper native Revit wall in my model. So it's this the Grasshopper gives you full control over this translation process.
Mm-hmm. We have Scoured, who's a returning viewer of the show. How's it going, Scoured? Said, have you figured out how to take Revit model from the latest version, translate it into Rhino, and then push it to geometry and into an older version of Revit?
Yeah, you could definitely do that.
In theory, you could do it. Yeah, right. I mean, it sounds dangerous, but I mean, I don't know how much what you would lose, but you definitely can probably get a lot of it forward, right? I would imagine, or backwards, I guess, in that case.
This other example that I have is actually Jaffe created, one of the guys on the Rhino Inside Revit team. He has created this, and it's sort of like a piece of a slab, and then we have structure support underneath, and you can see sort of like the spacing between them, and there are some different hangers, right? And notice each one of the hangers have different connection types depending whether they're connecting to the slab or the metal members there, right? The steel members there.
Right.
I can see very easily. I can see the geometry of that and all these stuff that have been created right here in Rhino. But here's the nice part. This Grasshopper definition manages creation of all these tracks and the hangers and everything else that's in there. So I can go and change. I can go and say change the distance between these hangers, right? And then based on where it's actually being placed, it correctly picks the right connection type and all that kind of stuff, and it sort of like fills my model. And I do have a schedule that as I'm changing this, obviously the count of those changes in my model and the schedule gets updated. So it's sort of like a collaborative process between what Rhino and Grasshopper can create and how Revit can schedule all that data and how much of it you want to fill in, the properties that you want to set values on, and all that kind of stuff.
So obviously in that situation, that's a really cool example, by the way, and I'm sure people are probably like this with their mouths open because that's a really, really neat example that I haven't seen yet. So obviously all of those hangers and those were all families that were built and defined in Revit, right? But you're using Grasshopper to manage the spacing and all those rules and definitions of what that does.
Yeah, exactly. So I can, like, for example, I can here and say element type picker, or like, let's just use one of the standard ones, one of the standard inputs. Let's say like a levels picker, right? So we have created these custom pickers for families and types and all that kind of stuff. Like if I want to select one of the levels in the model, I can just throw a component in here and select the level. And this component pulls information from the active model that we have. Grasshopper also works with multiple documents at the same time. So a lot of these components, like if I want to add, let's say add a grid, I can scroll over and add this document parameter to it as well. So I can create the same grid in like 5 different documents at the same time that they're open in my Revit. Or like copy content from one document to another document, that kind of stuff. All these components are document aware basically in Revit.
So before you move on from that, I guess as I'm watching this, and I'm not just I try not to just ask questions where I'm interested, because I'm obviously always interested in these content, but I'm trying to think of the viewers as well, and some of the different type of viewers that watch this channel, and some of them may not even be familiar with Dynamo, for example, or maybe just learning Dynamo, and so seeing what you're showing us, right? As I mean, I am familiar with Dynamo, so seeing Grasshopper isn't necessarily terrifying to me. However, I don't really know Grasshopper. I'll admit that right up front. And so looking at this, I'm thinking, well, this seems freaking awesome, but it looks like I need to learn Grasshopper in order to make this work. I guess my question would be, how difficult is that task? Is it like learning Dynamo for those who are trying to do that right now, for example, or just went through it? Or do you think it's actually a little more straightforward? And do you actually need to 100% use Grasshopper to make these connections?
So I would say, like, personally, this is obviously it's sort of like an opinion from me, right? I've worked with Dynamo before, but I personally find Grasshopper a lot easier to use. It's much more user friendly. There's lots of this 13 years of experience and documentation and questions and all that kind of stuff around it. There is thousands of Grasshopper plugins and thousands of Rhino plugins. So any plugin that you used to use in Rhino and Grasshopper before, let's say you want your Revit model to send some data to an Arduino board. Grasshopper is your friend because there's a plugin to do that.
Hmm.
All sorts of stuff, all sorts of plugins are available. Like all these buttons that I'm clicking are basically different plugins that are available for Grasshopper.
Hmm.
So through this, you have access to this host of different things. Grasshopper itself, running it is very easy. If you had sort of like I would say it's easier than learning Dynamo, because Dynamo has a lot of quirks that you kind of have to learn. Grasshopper is sort of like designed to be this very easy to use scripting
Less
environment.
quirky.
Yeah, less quirky
Less
kind
quirky.
of stuff.
So then
So
I
it's
guess
very consistent. Like one when you learn one thing in Grasshopper, that applies everywhere you go inside Grasshopper. So you don't have to learn a lot of like nuances on that kind of stuff, right?
Right. So then I guess the follow-up question to that was sort of, so do we need to use Grasshopper to connect Rhino geometry to Revit in the way that you're showing? Is there any way to do that without Grasshopper?
Yeah, so this is sort of like, it's a good segue to this second thing that I wanted to, this other thing that I wanted to talk about is that Grasshopper has this component that's called the scripting component, right? So if I go here, I'm going to grab my custom GS Python script, and this component holds a script inside of it. And in this example, it's a Python script. And notice because we are running in the same application, I can reference Rhino Inside API, Revit API, and Rhino API at the same time. So I can use these three different applications in my script at the same time. And any other plugin and application that's running in Revit can do the same, right? So you could potentially do this from a Dynamo definition as long as Rhino Inside is loaded. There's a plugin for Revit that's called Conveyor that sort of like brings, it's a sort of like an advanced plugin to bring Rhino geometry into Revit. There's a version of that uses Rhino Inside Revit as the backend. Instead of trying to do all those conversions and all that kind of stuff, it uses the Rhino Inside Revit. Because they're running in the same application, you can pretty much write your own plugin that accesses both these APIs at the same time. So Grasshopper is just one of the easiest way to do this, right. But you could, there's a Python editor in here. You can write your own scripts. You can use Dynamo, all that kind of stuff, but you won't get the full functionality, obviously, right? So Grasshopper has like previews, all that kind of stuff. A lot of the stuff are not available in different platform if you're using that.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I think what I'm getting at is I'm thinking if I'm an architect or an engineer or something out there, and I receive this 3DM file from, I don't know, someone on my team or maybe a consultant, right? But all I want to do is be able to sort of bring that geometry in and use it somehow. Like, I guess what I was getting at is sort of, is the only way to do that is now I've got to go through the method or the task of at least learning a little bit of Grasshopper or finding the script that works, or is there a way to just use this as somewhat connect that without Grasshopper? I guess I'm thinking through my mind someone who might be watching this and thinking, I have this 3DM file and how can I just bring this into Revit and use it maybe without having to plug in nodes and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so Revit can link and import 3DM files, right? We have also created, if you open the Rhinoceros tab, there's an import 3DM. We try to make it as easy as possible. This works with Rhino 7, all sub-D geometry, the new file format of the 3DM, all that kind of stuff. So you can use this to very easily bring your geometry in. One other thing that it can do is that a lot of large companies are using Rhino Inside Revit right now, right? So I can add just an example of it here. Let's say you have somebody at your office that creates, that knows Grasshopper and can create some of these tools, right? I've placed some of those tools in this directory, and I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to load these tools in my Rhino Inside Revit interface. Each one of this is a Grasshopper definition. So if I click on this, it'll build a cube for me or a circle for me and that kind of stuff, right? So if you have at least somebody that knows Grasshopper, they can create some of these definitions and distribute them in your company as just tools to make it easier for everybody else. But all of this still is using the Rhino Inside Revit as the backend.
No, I love it. I think, the idea of interoperability and trying to figure out how to get all these things to work together and not just be like you were saying of sort of an import or a static moment in time, and then what file format and how do you open it in here and save it as this just to bring it in there and just so you can click faces, like that whole thing. I guess what's pretty cool about what you just showed is, in theory, you could also be the consultant who set up the definition for
Exactly. Yeah.
so you could send a 3DM file with a definition that connects everything for you, which I think is really cool. I mean, when you think about it that way, all the programs that we try to play in the same sandbox with Revit, if they all had this potential, then you can start breaking down those barriers a little more, and then it's just here's the definition, and you can now bring this in and connect it to X, Y, and Z, or plug in your curtain wall family and then click run, and our massing model will do all the rest or something like that, which I think is really neat. I think it's a cool concept.
Yeah, absolutely.
And more tangible than some of the other stuff that you hear. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Awesome. Somebody asked, and I think I'll build on it a little bit, which is any plans to make Rhino inside ArchiCAD? But I guess my question to add onto that is really like, I think I saw that there was a few other programs that Rhino Inside supports, and so I guess what are those? And sort of, I know that's not maybe where you're focused on, but what other programs does Rhino Inside have or support? I guess.
Yeah, so McNeel created Rhino Inside as a technology that makes Rhino available inside other applications.
Mm-hmm.
The task that sort of like makes it available is that somebody has to write the plugin for that specific application to load Rhino, right? Rhino Inside Revit is the one that we have created and we are maintaining. Mm-hmm. There are projects. I think ArchiCAD, they have their own connector, their own Rhino Inside that they have created and they maintain. Tekla has another one. There's one for Blender that's going on, and a couple of different other applications are doing the same. None of these other ones are actually like directly McNeel projects, I guess. Mm-hmm. We create Rhino Inside and we support Rhino Inside. Whatever application it goes to, it sort of like depends on who they develop. Like the one I know, the one that's in Tekla is actually developed by Tekla itself. So sort of like sometimes the companies do it, sometimes some other developer maintains that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
There are the Rhino Inside repo has a couple of examples of like how you can load it in AutoCAD and Illustrator and a couple of different applications as well. Mm-hmm. Just like in case if somebody's interested into getting creating a plugin like that.
Somebody had an interesting question, probably along the lines of when I was asking about the whole Dynamo Grasshopper a thing. There is like what are the type of things? I guess the question is, compared to Dynamo, is there anything you can't do while using Grasshopper or vice versa? So I guess is there a limitation that Grasshopper exists with Rhino Inside as opposed to maybe Dynamo, which is, I guess, the Revit API? I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking that there's not that many because, like you said, it's running inside the same state. But I'd like to hear what your thoughts on that, knowing that I know you know both.
Well, basically, the only limitation is if you are working with a Revit model, the only limitation is Revit API. So if there is something that Revit API doesn't let us do, that is limited. And it's going to be the same in Dynamo, in your own plugins that you write, or in Grasshopper or anything else. Like, for example, we have project parameters in Revit that we manage through the project parameters. There's nothing in the API that can let you create project parameters. That's a limitation. Grasshopper is going to have the same thing. Dynamo is going to have the same thing, all that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
So that's the primary limitation. Other than that, when you have Grasshopper, there's a lot of functionality available here. Like, for example, we don't have a component for stairs yet. Mm-hmm. So that is something that we're working on and we have to add. So if you have a case that, hey, I want to be able to programmatically create different types of stairs, share it with us and let us know, and we can create those for you and sort of like add it to Rhino Inside Revit. One of the things that we have also done is that if you go to Rhino Inside Revit sort of like website, I can show you, like, if you go under guides, like, for example, somebody asked me for openings, components related to openings. And we didn't want to like keep them waiting for sort of like to add this stuff to the Rhino Inside Revit itself. So we created a lot of Python components because also Grasshopper has a scripting environment, right? Mm-hmm. So we created a bunch of Python components that with examples of how to use them and all that kind of stuff that you can just download from here, throw them in the script, keep using them until like the actual final fully finished component shows up in Grasshopper in Rhino Inside Revit.
Got it. That makes sense. No, that's neat. So the way I kind of see it when it comes to that is and again, this is through the lens of a Dynamo user myself, right? For many years, is you always had that Dynamo geometry area where you're kind of creating that dynamo geometry in however that works on the back end, and then you can pump it into Revit as, you know, whatever that mass is. You're kind of, in theory, you're kind of doing a similar thing, but instead you've got the entire Rhino geometry engine as the back end, right?
Yeah.
And that's pretty neat. Not to mention you can always flop into Rhino itself and use any of the primitive tools to model within it, which is pretty cool. That's pretty powerful.
Exactly. Any kind of computation you want to do on geometry, creation of different geometry types, of these NURBS, meshes, all that kind of stuff is accessible through Rhino Common, plus exporting files to different formats, all that kind of stuff. Like even Grasshopper has some of the components for this. So under utils, you can bring a file into the, let me actually see, my eyes aren't really seeing this correctly, but you can import a file in here in different formats and export it and all that kind of stuff, like from Grasshopper itself. There's a lot of stuff that Grasshopper already has, but anything that it doesn't, if you're working with your scripts, you can access it through both of the APIs.
Awesome. So I'm not sure if you had another example. Did you have another example that you wanted to run through?
No. There are a couple of different things that I just wanted to touch. I wanted to tell everybody that like a lot of large companies are using Rhino Inside Revit more and more. And I just wanted to sort of like touch on a couple of different things. There's always lots of questions about licensing, right? Rhino Inside Revit is free. This plugin that you get with all these components and all that kind of stuff that comes into Grasshopper, that's free. The only thing that you have to get a license for is the actual Rhino that you install on your machine, right? But Rhino has what we call cloud licenses, called Cloud Zoo. So you could get some licenses for your office as long as when somebody loads Rhino inside their Revit, that's the only times that they consume one license. If they just open a Revit and don't use Rhino inside Revit, they won't really take up a license. So that's one. And then we also created recently a BIM 360 plugin. So if you go to forums, McNeel forums, and you can access this very easily from the Rhino Inside Revit website, go up there into the menu and go to forums. Sorry, my screen is all like different sizes and stuff.
Sorry, and don't worry, everyone. I will make sure to put links afterwards. I'll have Ehsan send me the links if I don't remember all of them, and then we'll have the link to the forum. We'll have links to where to download and all the resources. So
yeah, so Scott just posted about this. We created a plugin that we call the BIM 360 file locker for Rhino. So if you watch that video, very easy, install that plugin for Rhino, and Rhino has its own package manager these days, so it's very easy to install. What you can do is that when you share your 3DM files on BIM 360, so if I go to my drive here and look at some of the files in my BIM 360, I have a whole bunch of Rhino and Grasshopper files right here in my BIM 360 project, right? When you start opening these files in Rhino, it automatically locks the file for you on BIM 360, so make sure nobody overwrites you. And sort of like if somebody already has a block on that file, it'll notify you that there's a lock there. And the last thing I wanted to mention is the sort of like the website and the documentation for Rhino Inside Revit. I showed you a little bit of in here. This is the homepage for it that sort of like introduces all of this. The getting started is a sort of like a 5-minute read that gets you started. Most of the stuff that we talked in this session, guides are very specific. So if you want to know exactly how to work with walls and how walls work in Revit and Rhino and Rhino Inside Revit, there's lots and lots of examples and instructions there. And then there's a discover page that we put all the good videos and podcasts and all that kind of stuff about Rhino Inside Revit in here too. So there's a lot of good content, people talking about showcasing their projects, what they have done with Rhino Inside Revit. Forums we talked about. And the last thing is I showed you kind of the scripting environment for Grasshopper. This is sort of like a way to kind of show you that Rhino Inside Revit alongside Rhino and Revit also brings you an API, and the documentation for that API is right here. And you can see we have shown how you can use this in your Python scripts and your C# scripts. And what it does is that it brings you a lot of automated stuff. Like for example, one of them is the geometry conversions. You can access this API directly. Like for example, in here, if I have a variable that has a Revit box, I can just call two bounding box XYZ a Rhino box. I can very easily with one method, I can convert it to a geometry that's equivalent in Rhino API. So if you have a wall in there, you can grab the mesh. If you have a box, if you have a sphere, all that kind of stuff, the geometry conversions can be done very easily. Unit conversions, accessing the context, all that kind of stuff. And there's a really good documentation associated with it too. That's sort of like more along the lines of a proper API documentation. So geometry decoder, let's say I want to convert a line to a curve. So it just takes a Revit line and turns it into a Rhino geometry curve. And you can easily see any of these. If you click on those, it'll take you directly to the APIs for those applications, all that kind of stuff. So this website is actually a very, very good knowledge base for everything Rhino Inside Revit.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so make sure you send me the link so I can put all the correct links down.
Yeah,
but I saw most of them there, but make sure you do that, and I'll make sure to put them all in the descriptions there. Yeah. I guess I had one quick question because you went past it real fast, but that BIM 360 thing is interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Is there, I mean, you don't have to, if you can't say any of it, you need to, but is there any other things on the board that you're dealing with BIM 360 on as far as Rhino? I'm interested in that idea of what you guys just did there, and why I guess other than just being a file host, have you explored what else you could do with that, or is it really just because of the file hosting side of it?
Yeah, so this is what we kind of decided to start from. One of the most important things is that, like at McNeel, the Grasshopper users, Rhino users, Rhino Inside Revit users, you guys are the driving sort of like factors for us. So we listen to you and see what you're looking for. If I created this plugin, it's because somebody had a need for it and they asked for it and all that kind of stuff. So we put it out there in the forums, get it tested, try it out, see if it works with your workflows, and see what else you need. And let us know in the forums. Our emails are there. You can directly contact us, all that kind of stuff. Just let us know what you need, and we can take it to the next step. I just wanted to show you this when I open Rhino, and this is an independent instance of Rhino. This is not Rhino Inside Revit. It tells me that successfully connected to ADC, which is the Autodesk Desktop connector that's running in your background, and I can open very easily open a Rhino model from my project here, and I'm going to show you an example of this file, the 3DM that's locked by Jaffe. So when I open this file, it's going to notify me that this file is locked. Make sure you can make changes to it, but your changes might be sent to the recycle bin. That's how the Autodesk Desktop connector works. So we didn't change.
Yeah, no, we've learned that when with Navis files, Navis NWF files. It's you learn that real fast that working on the Autodesk connector, some of those limitations. Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it. I was just checking to make sure there was no other questions. I don't see anything wide open. So yeah, I appreciate you coming on, Ehsan, and showing us Rhino Inside. I look forward to exploring it myself, as well as seeing more and digging through the website and seeing more case studies and ways people use this, because I do think that hopefully everyone watching this in the future can already start seeing some ideas of how this could potentially be a tool in their toolkit. Awesome. Well, Ehsan, where can people find you best?
So I guess the best place to reach any of us would be the McNeel forums, right? So my handle is at Nejad on the forums, and you can see like that's Scott, that is Jaffe, Kike is right there. Any of these guys that you want to reach out, you can just direct sort of like mention us in your post. This is the best place to ask your questions, ideas, anything like that. You can reach us out right there.
Awesome. Great, man. Well, thanks again for coming on. I appreciate it.
Of course. Anytime.
I look forward to seeing how all this develops, as well as the next time I want you to come on and talk about PyRevit again, because we all love talking about PyRevit these days. Every day I find something new that I'm like, this is useful. So I appreciate that, and everyone else, thanks for joining us. I appreciate you guys all joining tonight. Welcome back. I look forward to this. I've got, like I said, 10 episodes already lined up, maybe more coming. So stay tuned. Some really cool guests, some returning, some new. Thank you to Twinmotion for sponsoring this episode. Again, head on over to twinmotion.com/BIMAfterDark. You'll get a free trial, and then it'll also show them that you watch the show and you support me. So thank you guys again for tuning in. You can reach me at the Revit Kid on Twitter, as well as here on the channel. Don't forget to subscribe. And with that, I want to bid you all adieu. Stay safe, be happy, and I'll see you guys next week, same time, same place, 9 p.m. And yeah, thanks a lot, guys.